Today we gather for worship from many different locations, which is always true, but today even more so. This is a pre-recorded service, and rather than coming to you live from the sanctuary, we are inviting you across time and space to create worship with us, wherever you are and wherever you are watching this. As we prepare to cross the threshold together, you may wish to grab a chalice and/or your coffee. You might want to gather a fidget, knitting, or some doodle paper to keep your hands busy. You may wish to connect earbuds to your device and go outside for worship, whether you choose to sit in a hammock or walk somewhere scenic and beautiful. Or you may simply need to sit still and quiet and take some calming breaths. As the prelude plays, take time to dial into how you are and what your body and spirit need. Get ready and present for this worship service, whatever that means for you.
Good morning and welcome to White Bear Unitarian Universalist Church. My name is Claire Schleicher. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a member of our board of directors. It is good to be together, a community of youth, adults, and children sharing the values of courage, reverence, and compassion. I warmly invite you to join the Cyber Social Hour, which will begin 5 minutes after the postload. Welcome to our church. Together, we grow our souls and serve the world in love.
Come in. Come into this place which we make holy by our presence. Come in with all your vulnerabilities and strengths, fears and anxieties, loves and hopes. For here you need not hide, nor pretend, nor be anything other than who you are and who you are called to be. Come into this place where we can touch and be touched, heal and be healed, forgive and be forgiven. Come into this place where the ordinary is sanctified, the human is celebrated, the compassionate is expected. Come into this place, together we make it a holy place. I'm Reverend Jack, and my pronouns are he, him.
Good morning. My name is Bjorn Peterson, and I use he, him, and they, them pronouns. For as long as I can remember, I've been in love with trees. Whether the black spruce and quaking aspen I camped among as a child, or the white oaks and silver maples I played beneath in the swamps where I grew up, trees have always held me in their magical embrace. As an adult, I have marveled at all we continue to learn about trees, the way they are interconnected, the ways they communicate, and the ways they are enmeshed in the ecosystems of which they are such important parts. As Western science continues to correct itself and catch up with the insights indigenous communities have held since time immemorial, the detailed view we are gaining into the complexity of trees is astounding and wonderful. Far from the view we once held of competition and dominance, we are coming to understand how complementary and coordinated so much of life is. This dynamic stands in contrast to so many of our human attitudes toward thriving. We seem to have forgotten how enmeshed we are with those we see as our other, those we think are not only different, but separate from us. We begin to believe that our other is given dignity, if our other is given dignity, freedom, inclusion, or protection, we will be left impoverished. But the trees, along with so many other of our relatives here on earth, remind us that our interconnection, though often invisible, is a fundamental condition of our being, that there is no real thriving apart from those around us. The trees remind me that whatever freedom I have, it is not a freedom from that interconnection with people and planet, but a freedom with and to the community of life. Today, let us light the chalice for the bonds we have to all other beings and the basic truth that our liberation is bound up with the liberation of all people and the wellness of the world.
My name is Nico, and my pronouns are they, them. Join me in the unison opening words. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Please rise now in body or in spirit, wherever you are, to sing and dance along with our opening hymn, number 1074, Turn the World Around.
We come from the fire, living in the fire. Go back to the fire, turn the world around. We come from the water, living in the water. Go back to the water, turn the world around. We come from the mountain, living on the mountain. Go back to the mountain, turn the world around. Whoa, so is life. Ah, so is life. Whoa, so is life. Ah, so is life. Do you know who I am? Do you know who you are? See one another clearly. Do we know who we are? Do you know who I am? Do you clearly? Do you are? See one another clearly. Do we know? Do we are? Whoa, so is life a body? Whoa, so is life. Whoa, so is life a body? Whoa, so is life. Water make the river, river wash the mountain. Fire make the sunlight, turn the world around. Heart is of the river, body of the mountain. Spirit is the sunlight, turn the world around. We are of the spirit, truly of the spirit. Only can the spirit turn the world around. Whoa, so is life a body? Whoa, so is life. Whoa, so is life a body? Whoa, so is life.
Take a moment to find a place and a posture that feels right for you as we share a story together. Stretch, wiggle a little bit, sit down, walk around, take a breath. Today's story is about a person named Macy who lives in a house. Outside of Macy's house, there were all kinds of signs like the ones we have outside of our church building. Some of these signs said things like, "All are welcome here," "Black Lives Matter," and "Care for the Earth." She also had more practical signs like, "Ring doorbell to enter," and "Please wipe your shoes on the mat." All of these signs were placed in preparation for Macy's friends to come over for a party. There was also a crack in the sidewalk right in front of the door to Macy's house, a crack that made just enough of a bump to trip people as they walked by. Macy didn't notice the bump until, whoops, ouch, her first guest stubbed their toe and almost fell. "Are you okay?" Macy asked. "I'm so sorry about that bump." One by one, Macy's guests entered. One by one, they stubbed their toes as they tripped over the bump, and Macy apologized until her throat was sore. After all her friends had gone home for the evening, Macy decided to add another sign in front of her house. "Watch your step," it said. "There's a bump." The next time Macy threw a party, the new sign made sure that not a single one of her guests tripped over that bump, and by the next party, she'd had time to redo her sidewalk and get rid of the bump altogether. There are parts of our covenant that we as a community consistently fail to live up to. We stub our toes one after another over and over again. Luckily for us, covenants are living documents and we get to shape them in ways that are helpful to us. So when we notice that we keep messing up about the same thing, we can add something extra, like we did when we affirmed the 8th principle a few weeks ago, to remind us to work hard on meeting that aspiration. But that's not quite enough. After adding that reminder, let us be mindful of how we are moving along the sidewalk, doing our best to avoid the bump until we realize our dream of fixing it.
This congregation is exclusively sustained by the generosity of the people who call this place home. By giving to this morning's offering, you are giving life to WBUUC's mission of growing souls and serving the world. You can donate on the WBUUC webpage or use the text to give option. Thank you for your generosity and your faith in this life we live together.
Join me in a spirit of meditation. Take a moment to notice where you're at right now. Notice your physical location, what it looks like, sounds like, feels like. Notice your emotional location. How are you feeling right now? And where in your body are you holding that feeling? Mindful of where you are, both physically and emotionally, I invite you to participate in a labyrinth meditation. A labyrinth is a twisty, spirally path that you follow with your finger or your whole body until you reach the center. Then you turn around and follow the path back out again. There are two options for this practice. You can stay where you are and trace something with your finger. Perhaps you'll trace your own hand or trace a shape on your leg or on your chair. Maybe you'll trace the outline of the device you're watching this on. The second option is to physically move around the space you are in. You might travel to the edge of your room or create a zigzag pattern across your floor. You might create your own path, wandering through the grass outside. Before we begin this practice of labyrinth meditation, I invite you to think about the people in your life, perhaps including yourself, that need some prayer or positive energy right now. Please begin this practice now, and we'll call you back in a few minutes.
The first reading is a poem called Storage by Mary Oliver. When I moved from one house to another, there were many things I had no room for. What does one do? I rented a storage space and filled it. Years passed. Occasionally I went there and looked in, but nothing happened. Not a single twinge of the heart. As I grew older, the things I cared about grew fewer, but were more important. So one day I undid the lock and called the trash man. He took everything. I felt like the little donkey when his burden is finally lifted. Things. Burn them. Burn them. Make a beautiful fire. More room in your heart for the love, for the trees, for the birds who own nothing. The reason they can fly. The second reading is an excerpt from the work of Alan Watts. Now it is my contention that existence, the physical universe, is basically playful. There is no necessity for it whatsoever. It isn't going anywhere. That is to say, it doesn't have some destination that it ought to arrive at. But it is best understood by analogy with music. Because music, as an art form, is essentially playful. We say, you play the piano. You don't work the piano. Music differs from travel. When you travel, you're trying to get somewhere. And of course we, being a very compulsive and purposeful culture, are busy getting everywhere faster and faster and faster until we eliminate the distance between places. I mean, with modern jet travel, you can arrive almost instantaneously. What happens as a result of that is that the two ends of your journey become the same place. So you eliminate the distance and you eliminate the journey. But the fun of the journey is to travel, not to obliterate traveling. In music, though, one doesn't make the end of a composition the point of the composition. If that were so, the best conductors would be those who played fastest, and there would be composers who only wrote finales. People would go to concerts just to hear one crashing chord because that's the end. Same way in dancing. You don't aim at a particular spot in the room and say, that's where you should arrive. The whole point of the dancing is the dance. If we thought of life by analogy as a journey or a pilgrimage, which had a serious purpose at the end, and the thing was to get to that end, we would miss the point the whole way along. But you see, life is a musical thing, and you were supposed to sing or dance while the music was being played.
Based on our reading from Alan Watts, I wonder if our focus question today should be something like, as we journey through life, how are we going? Do we have a single destination in mind and a one-track mind about how to get there and how we might choose the fastest and most efficient route? Or are we interested in enjoying the journey, savoring the dance moves and the music along the way? This question, how are we going, is really at the core of Unitarian Universalism. And this reality is most clearly evident in the fact that we are a religion steeped not in creed, but in covenant. We say this often, and we repeat our covenant every week, but sometimes we forget how hard the covenant actually is to uphold. Sometimes we focus on the freedom from, as in the freedom from creeds and dogmas, more than we focus on the freedom to, as in the freedom to covenant, the freedom to agree to be together, to live together in a specific way. Freedom can hardly be understood without an understanding of its opposites, like slavery, compulsion, tyranny, or oppression. And we can't celebrate freedom simply because it is complex. Along with freedom comes the restrictions and restraints that we accept as a necessary cost to those freedoms. For example, we have a freedom of speech, but we don't have a freedom from consequences. From a societal standpoint, unless one is a hermit living in complete isolation and off the grid, we live within various small communities that all have different agreements, whether they are spoken or unspoken. Some of these agreements are the laws by which we agree to abide, so that we can potentially have a high-functioning society. Some of these agreements are the laws we agreed to disregard, like the unspoken understanding regarding freeway driving that if everyone goes 5 or 10 miles per hour over the speed limit, we can't all get in trouble, right? But in all these agreements, we see where individual freedom butts up against a collective restraint or restriction. And it's quite similar here in this church community. People sometimes say things like, oh, I love my UU church. It's a place where people can believe whatever they want. And my response is always a bit more nuanced than that. Yes, of course, we believe in freedom of conscience and freedom of belief and of expression, but we also sometimes have to draw some hard lines in the sand and put up some actual barriers or protections against certain ways of thinking and behaving. There are some beliefs that are actually out of step with our principles and values and our covenant. For instance, we don't tolerate bigotry, xenophobia, homophobia, transphobia, misogyny, or white supremacist thinking. They conflict directly with our principles of inclusion and justice, and they violate the principle of inherent worth and dignity. Here at this church, we are encouraged to make meaning of our lives, and we are also trusted to be the expert on our own lived experiences. However, we are not free to use our experiences as weapons against others or to make meaning of our own lives without having accountable and deep relationships with people here who have different identities and different experiences than we do. A big part of the beauty of this covenant is that we do this work together. Just like Bjorn mentioned in his chalice lighting, the trees remind us that our interconnection, though often invisible, is a fundamental condition of our being, that there is no real thriving apart from those around us. This same deep sense of interconnection is a main theme of a book I have read called On Looking by Alexandra Horowitz. She is an animal behavior research scientist, and she brings various experts with her on walks throughout New York City, where she lives. Between her astute observational eye and the expertise of her guest walkers, I have learned a great deal, including some of the official science and vernacular behind the realities of living in an urban landscape. Even though I knew some of these realities by experience, I didn't know the actual theories or research studies behind them. For one walk, she is joined by an urban sociologist who studies pedestrian movement, and who also founded an organization called Project for Public Spaces. During their walk, they approached a particularly busy intersection, and when the light turned green, both sides of the street released a platoon of people heading toward each other. Quick side note, in the field of pedestrian movement analysis, a platoon is a large connection of bunched up, unaffiliated walkers. The pedestrian expert and the author marveled together as the north-facing and south-facing platoons weaved smoothly past each other without so much as a bump or a jostle. Maybe you have experienced this phenomenon before. If not, I encourage you to pay close attention the next time you're on a crowded sidewalk and watch how we navigate past each other. There is a very specific slip slide that walking pedestrians do. It involves twisting the torso so that you are leading with one shoulder instead of your nose, and so that your shoulders are not broad at its broadest, and hence they're most unpassable. Can you picture that? This simple little slip slide, and we do it so often that it becomes almost second nature. And we often don't even notice it or think about it until we pass someone who fails to do it, whether they weren't taught the same trick or are unable to do it or just aren't paying attention. But when it works, when we pass each other seamlessly on a crowded sidewalk, we are enacting a specific agreement. We could call it the code of the sidewalk. Together, Horowitz says, we are doing a cooperative dance, a kind of pedestrian jig without even knowing we are dancing. For me, this dance is quite similar to movements in other species, schools of fast-moving fish, murmurations of swooping and diving birds, army ants, locusts, and other migratory animals. For us humans, many of these moments are unconscious or instinctual, or learned at an early age, and they are reinforced societally. But what I find most interesting is Horowitz's analysis. One reason all of our step sliding, pedestrian jigging works is that we are regularly looking ahead and at each other. We do not just look to see who is there, we constantly, steadily look to calculate how we need to move relative to those around us. And it is that movement, that agreement, that most fascinates me, especially in the context of a community that responds to each other and a community that holds each other to account. Or worded differently, a responsible and accountable community. This tension between freedom and responsibility has taken center stage in my thoughts this week in the context of civic engagement. This is the week every year where many people celebrate a holiday called Independence Day, and many people throw around the word freedom like it's some kind of frisbee. And it really got me thinking, well, first of all, freedom for who? Who really reaped the benefit of our independence in 1776? Realistically, it was only white male landowners and the people to whom they chose to pass along some benefit. But that's a sermon for a different day. I was also thinking about what kind of responsibilities and covenants we hold as citizens that counterbalance our freedoms. And a friend suggested jokingly that we should have 4th of July resolutions, much like our New Year's Eve resolutions. Initially, I just laughed. But then I started thinking more about what it would look like to make resolutions to be more engaged citizens. New Year's Eve would be for personal resolutions, the 4th of July for civic resolutions. This year I have moved to a new city, and my civic resolution is to familiarize myself with the politics of a new place, so that I can feel more prepared to vote by November. And I'm just wondering, are any of you willing to join me in making your own civic resolutions? If so, drop me a line. I'd love to hear about the civic resolutions that y'all are making. And around Independence Day, it feels important to celebrate not just the freedom from, but also the freedom to. The freedom to be better. The freedom to choose a new way. We see this same nuance from Mary Oliver. Once she was free from certain burdens, she became more free to love and free to wonder. I felt like the little donkey, she says, when his burden is finally lifted. Things, burn them, make a beautiful fire. More room in your heart for love, for the trees, for the birds who own nothing, the reason they can fly. Have you had these moments of burden-free flight before? Have you experienced this freedom? For me, a couple moments come to mind. First, my 3.5-month cross-country trip through various parts of Asia. To travel for that long with just one backpack was both limiting and freeing. and I discovered a lot about myself in the process. But another moment comes to mind as well. Some of you may have heard of it already, but there is a local group/movement that calls itself Don't You Feel It Too? It's hard to describe, but I'll give it a try. It is basically an exploration of dance and physical expression in public spaces. People gather in the same general vicinity, and then each person puts in their own earbuds and dances to their own music. It celebrates the place where the individual meets the communal, and it interrupts some very deeply held and often unstated beliefs. For instance, the belief held by some that only certain places are for dancing, or the belief that for someone to just be dancing in public to their own secret music is weird or unsocial in some way. But what this group does is it subverts these beliefs. When a large group of people is dancing together, but separately, in one place, where dance doesn't usually happen, a bystander who notices them might feel like they are the outsider, like they are not in on the secret. Often, those bystanders end up asking one of the dancers what they are doing, and the dancers are instructed to answer simply with, "Don't you feel it too?" This movement started out as a protest during the 2008 RNC convention in St. Paul, where people who had felt unnoticed, or even some who felt like certain politicians were trying to erase them or deny their existence, decided to protest with their presence, with joy, and with dance and expression. The practice has changed and deepened a lot in the 15 years since its inception, but I've seen this practice be a transformational one where the freedom to express is fully celebrated. Just a few years ago, one of the founders of Don't You Feel It Too led a workshop at the Twin Cities Youth Con, attended by some of our WBUUC youth. This practice needs a certain level of courage to step out of our usual comfort zones, but there can be a certain joy and freedom in disrupting some of our usual patterns. And as Alan Watts reminds us, the fun of the journey is to travel, not to obliterate traveling. The whole point of the dancing is the dance. If we thought of life by analogy as a journey or a pilgrimage, which had a serious purpose at the end, and the thing was to get to that end, we would miss the whole point along the way. But you see, life is a musical thing, and you were supposed to sing or dance while the music was being played. This dance we are dancing as a covenantal community is beautiful and hard, and it takes some serious resolutions. But the point isn't just to get there and to get there quick. The point is the process, the journey it takes to get there. And that takes movement, and it takes trust. And it takes a sense of freedom to, not just freedom from. Let's be free together to covenant. Let's celebrate the constraints that allow us to cohere as a community. And let's celebrate the freedom that we have as individuals within that community. But let's not forget the responsibility and accountability that we feel toward each other. Blessed be, and amen. Please join me in the closing hymn, number 159, in our gray hardback hymnal. This is our song.
This is my song, O God of all the nations, a song of peace for lands afar and mine. This is my home, the country where my heart is. Here are my hopes, my dreams, my holy shrine. But other hearts in other lands are beating with hopes and dreams as true and high as mine. My country's skies are bluer than the ocean, and sunlight beams on clover leaf and pine. But other lands have sunlight too and clover, and skies are everywhere as blue as mine. Oh, hear my song, thou God of all the nations, a song of peace for their land and for mine.
May peace dwell within our hearts and understanding in our minds. May courage steel our will and the love of truth forever guide us.